Energy, climate change, science, and technology. This is the carbon dioxide increase, and it matches the global warming. On that evening, when I did this, my reaction was, wow, global warming is real, and it's caused by humans. And if there are skeptics in the audience, or skeptics you know, notice that I did not depend on previous work. We did the work independently because I had doubts about the previous work. But this shows that global warming is real and caused by humans. Is it going to be a problem? That's a much tougher question. I don't know. I think it is. We're entering an era where, due to human warming, it is going to be warmer than it has been over the entire span of human civilization. Changes like that usually are bad. I wrote an article in the New York Times about this. I became called the Converted Skeptic. I was properly skeptical before this. There were issues that were raised that did not have good answers. We looked at it, and my team, my Nobel Prize winning team, some of the greatest scientists in the world, worked on this team as part of Berkeley Earth, and we reached this rather firm conclusion. There's still skepticism. I meet people who say, my town has gotten colder. What I say to them is, would you like me to show you a list of 10,000 towns that have gotten colder? I can do that. Every blue circle here in the United States, and the same is true around the world, is a location that got colder. The red spots are the ones that got warmer. It may not look like it, but there are twice as many red spots. And when you average them, you get the curve I showed you previously. Global warming is quite small. Since 1900, it's been 1 degree Celsius. But the weather is several degrees Celsius. You cannot sense global warming yourself. And people who tell you that you can are exaggerating. And that's why there are so many skeptics. This is a movie that we made based on our analysis of the data. I had this on showing. It shows the temperature. In the early 1700s, there were thermometers. The thermometers were invented in the early 1700s, and only in Europe and the United States were temperatures actually being measured. But as we jump further ahead, 1850s, it's reaching more around the world. Nonetheless, these are excellent measurements, but look how it varies. Look how it pulses. Hot, warm, hot, cold, cool. The variations are large. Here are the variations. You can see the red dot shows you the variations. And here's the rise. The variations are large. It's hard to see this unless you have hundreds of years of data from thousands of locations. But there we have it, the entire world. And the temperature is gradually going up. Global warming is real and caused by humans. Expected temperature rise. Once in the next 30 to 60 years, the temperature will go up another 1.5 degrees Celsius. That may not sound very much, but it is a lot. It will affect people's lives. At this point, it will be the warmest that the temperature has ever been in the history of civilization. Some people say it's already the warmest. They're exaggerating. They don't know that. They're trying to make a point. People exaggerate this because they think the public is not concerned about 1 degree Celsius. So they exaggerate. They say hurricanes are increasing. maybe they even believe it. Hurricanes are not increasing. I'll show you that. They say that storms are increasing. Bigger storms, more storms. There's more drought. That's not true. It's not scientifically based. They may think that's the case, but if you look at it scientifically, the evidence for global warming is in the temperature, not in all those other things. Scientifically, hurricanes are not increasing. People say this. They get this because some scientists will say hurricanes are increasing, usually not a hurricane expert. He's saying something he heard from somebody else. He didn't check it scientifically. People exaggerate in order to get the public attention. We heard that 2005 was the greatest hurricane season ever in the United States. The reason it was great was because of all these hurricanes out in the middle of the Atlantic. If we go back to 1933, there were no hurricanes in the middle of the Atlantic. The ones here haven't changed, just the ones in the Atlantic. Why were there no hurricanes in the middle of the Atlantic? Actually, it's not true that there were no hurricanes. It's just that ships would avoid the middle of the Atlantic because if you ran into a hurricane, it was a bad place to go. So people did not detect hurricanes in the middle of the Atlantic. There are no recorded hurricanes. It was an area avoided by ships. You undo this bias by looking at only the hurricanes that hit the coast, and then, as I showed you, there's no change. Violent tornadoes, we have them in the United States. People say they're going up. They're not. They're going down. Could they be going down due to global warming? Yes, that's possible. Global warming reduces the temperature difference between the pole and the equator. It reduces that temperature difference by warming up the poles more than you warm up the equator. It's that temperature difference that provides the flow that causes tornadoes and hurricanes. It is possible, I think even likely, that with global warming we will have fewer big storms. That's not a hard scientific prediction, but it's within the realm of possibility. We hear that the North, Alaska, is melting. And we see data like this. When a scientist looks at this data, the scientist gets suspicious, especially because of that big arrow. Let's take away the arrow. Now you see a pattern that looks a little bit different. Maybe you still see the rise, but the rise looks like it was cold. Whoop, it got warm. And then it didn't change. Since 1980, it didn't change. That's the actual record. What's going on? There are scientific papers that show that there was what they call a regime shift. Temperatures in the North Atlantic went pop. Maybe that's what's going on. I don't know if the warming of Alaska is related to global warming or not. People who say it is are not being scientific because they cannot rule out a change in the flow of the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans, which we know causes changes like this. So when they say Alaska is like the canary in the mine, it shows us that we have to do something. They are exaggerating. The greatest exaggerator of all, Al Gore, An Inconvenient Truth. He offered to pay to have his movie sent to every schoolhouse in the UK, in Great Britain, free, so that children can watch it. A parent objected and brought it to court. The judge in the United Kingdom had scientists come in to discuss the issues. This is not widely known outside of Britain. And the judge reached the conclusion that yes, he could distribute it freely, provided that he distribute, along with the movie, a list of 9 major mistakes in the movie. It would have been wonderful to distribute a movie with a list of mistakes. That would have been very educational to the students. But he decided not to distribute the movie and the list of mistakes. It was headlines in the British press. Almost nobody outside of Great Britain knows that this movie was analyzed by a judge and found to be seriously in error. The Nobel Committee certainly has not withdrawn its Nobel Prize. Remember, however, global warming is real and it's caused by humans. Almost everything you hear about climate change is not scientifically established, except for global warming, which is real, caused by humans, and I believe a cause for concern. So, what can we do about it? Just as there is nonsense about climate change, there is even more nonsense about what can we do about it. This is where a new level of objectivity is required. This is where you can play the most important role. You need to understand the possible solutions, the ones that will not work, and how they relate. Here in Korea, there is an opportunity to play a major role in slowing of global warming. But that opportunity is not the obvious one. And doing the obvious things, it turns out, doesn't work. There are, if next week you remember only one or two things from the lecture, let this next point be one of those two things. These are the emissions, carbon dioxide emissions of the United States. You notice back in 1960 they were way above those of China. They rose in the United States. They rose in China. The United States started to level off and is now going down. It's going down because it's reducing its coal use, replacing it with natural gas. Coal is 2 to 3 times more carbon dioxide than natural gas. Coal is the real problem around the world. China, meanwhile, has been building 50 gigawatts of coal every year. 50 gigawatts. That's the equivalent of building 7 entire New York cities every year. And they continue to shoot up. If you don't address China or India, the whole developing world, if you don't address them, you are not talking about solving global warming. If you're talking about how can Korea become carbon neutral, then you're not talking about global warming. Because global warming is not going to come from Korea or even from the United States. Let me show you a projection. This was published in an op-ed I wrote in the Wall Street Journal. And it showed, I wrote this in 2009, when the Copenhagen Treaty was being negotiated. And in that treaty, the idea was the developed world, Korea, the United States, Europe, we would actually reduce our emissions. Growing at 10% per year would have to slow their carbon growth to only 6% per year. That was the treaty. It was not signed, it was not ratified. But if it had been signed, if it had been ratified, if it had been fulfilled, this is what would have happened. The emerging economies, including China, shoot up. And by 2030, if Korea were to disappear and you had zero emissions, I mean, not a reduction of 30% like it's being proposed, but reduction of 100%, go to zero. In 3 months, the growth of China would undo all the good you did. 3 months. So what can Korea do? What could the United States do? We have much more than you do. But if we disappeared, all of the good would be undone by 3.5 years of Chinese growth. Do we want to shut down China? No. China has, I believe, the right to this kind of growth. It's wonderful to see the poor people of China becoming wealthy, to see them not approaching your standard of living or my standard of living, but getting there. This is a wonderful thing for us. And we don't want to slow that. We don't want to stop that. So what can we do? We can set an example. And this is what everybody in the developing world wants to do. They want to set an example. This is what Korea is trying to do with its electric cars, with its enormous tidal energy, by building solar plants. You're trying to set an example. But here's the catch. This is insight number 2. If you remember only 2 things from my talk, remember this one, number 2. And that is, any effort to reduce emissions is futile and often counterproductive unless it sets an example that the developing world can afford to follow. So, if you become energy neutral by building tidal power plants, China can't do that. They don't have the wonderful coastline compared to the size of the population that you have. It has to be affordable. If you're going to set an example, it must be an example that the developing world can follow. You can do this. And I have some suggestions. I'm trying to do similar things in the United States. I'm trying to get the United States to set an example that the developing world, not just China, but India, Malaysia, Indonesia, all of these countries, they are the ones who are going to be producing the carbon dioxide largely because of coal. We have to get them off coal. If you increase your coal use in Korea, you're setting the wrong example. Put succinctly, if it's not profitable, it's not sustainable. The developing world cannot afford to subsidize their energy sources. So let's look at solar. Here's a cost. This is a little bit cluttered, but I'll draw your attention to certain things. Here are the different types of energy sources. Here, this is the capacity factor, which tells you how frequently they run. You know, the wind isn't always blowing, and the sun isn't out at night. So there are different capacity factors. This is the capital cost. That turns out to be often cited misleadingly. But take a look at solar. So let me focus in on solar. And what you see is that solar photovoltaics is very expensive compared to coal. 3 times the cost to build a solar plant versus building the coal plant. Of course, then the sunlight is free. Unfortunately, you only have a 22% capacity factor. That means that 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6 days, 5 out of 6 times, the sun isn't out. It's below the horizon. It's sunrise and sunset. It's only above 1/6 of the time. I'll show you more data on that. And so in the end, even though you have to buy the fuel for coal, the cost of solar stays very, very high. It's more than twice for photovoltaic. Solar thermal here is a bit higher. I don't believe that's true. I believe solar thermal these days is cheaper than photovoltaics. But you'll find many tables like this. They all have the same pattern, that solar is much more expensive than coal, and that's why it's not being used in China. Oh, you think it is being used in China? I'll correct you in a moment. First, let me talk about something that is called a huge success in Korea. The Sinan solar photovoltaic plant. A huge success, according to the headlines. 24 megawatt capacity. Capacity. You can look on the website of the Sinan plant, and they will tell you how many kilowatt hours it actually produces in a year. You could divide that by the number of hours in a year, and you will find that the average power is only 4 megawatts. This is not a disputed number. It's not often advertised because they want you to think. Who's they? I don't know. People love to get excited about solar. They're having a love affair with solar. It is only 4 megawatts. The cost of it is also listed on the web page as if it's good. Well, it would be good for 24 megawatts, but for 4 megawatts, it's much higher than wind. Korea have energy independence. Sunlight, unlike coal, gas, and oil, sunlight is a natural resource of Korea. So it gives you energy security, but it doesn't address global warming because it has to be subsidized, and China and India cannot afford to do that. And we can't afford to subsidize them either. So it doesn't set an example. It's much more expensive, 6 times more expensive than alternatives. So in my mind, it's a success for energy security. It does not set an example that will help end global warming. So this is insight. Remember the 3 insights now? The first one is the developing world is now in charge of global warming. The second one is that to fight this, a technology has to be profitable. Otherwise, the developing world can't afford to follow it. And the third one is watch for this thing capacity. When they say the wind capacity is 10 megawatts, keep in mind you have to divide by 3. It's really only about 3 megawatts average because the wind doesn't blow all the time at a constant rate. But these don't. And so the word capacity should trigger a skepticism in your mind when you see it. China, often said to be really surging ahead, really not actually doing that well. It added 7 gigawatts capacity last year. That means it added 1 gigawatt. That's not even a super large nuclear power plant. All of what they added was 1 coal plant equivalent. Meanwhile, they added 50 coal plants of coal. So coal is surging ahead of solar. Don't have the and 2 of their companies went bankrupt. They're cutting back. Germany is cutting back on solar. I suspect that solar is past its period of great excitement. Now that the world recognizes that the developing world is in charge of global warming, that feel-good measures of, hey, I am energy neutral, I am carbon neutral, they don't really solve the problem. They make us feel good. What they mean is that when global warming hits us 30 years from now, when it becomes really bad, you, Korea, we in the United States will say, yeah, but it wasn't my fault. That's not problem solving. So I think it's the end of the solar era. Okay, so what can we use? Here's another chart of technologies, and take a look at this. This is the cost of coal, biomass, hydro, geothermal if you have it, natural gas, and so on. But we get to wind is not too bad. Not too bad. If it's this offshore here doesn't refer to on some island off the coast of Korea. It refers to in the middle of the sea, and that's really expensive. And solar still way up there. This one has solar thermal less than solar photovoltaic. Let me correct this now and put it for Korea, in which your natural gas is imported. So you can see natural gas is not really competitive unless the import price drops, which it will, because of the enormous fines in the United States, and I expect similarly enormous fines in China. I am very optimistic about natural gas in China. I've been there many times. I've visited the sites. I know about China. They will have natural gas. I think Europe is going to develop its natural gas. So the price of natural gas, of imported natural gas, will come down, but not enormously. It may come down by about 50%, 30 to 50%. So what else can be done? This one is absolutely key. This is the big item. This can be done. It can be done in the developing world. They are eager to do this. I would love to see your technology prowess be used on the issue of energy conservation and energy efficiency. I believe Amory Lovins has been to Korea many times. He has pushed what he calls negawatts. There is so much to be saved by energy conservation. But I do not mean on a hot day turning down the air conditioning. I do not mean on a cold day putting on a sweater. When you recommend things like that, as our President Jimmy Carter did years ago, saying, turn off your heat, put on a sweater, he teaches people that energy conservation is uncomfortable. And I don't want to do that. Make it as cool in the room as you want, but put some insulation in the walls so it doesn't take as much air conditioning. And I go through this, those of you who have read my book know I give examples there. The money return on the investment is huge. This is something where the technology and the consumer technology of Korea can be enormously important in improving energy efficiency of cars, energy efficiency of houses, of utensils, of many, many things. China often gets credit for its enormous success in renewables. I hate the term renewable. The reason I dislike it so much is that some renewables are awful. China built the Three Gorges Dam. It by itself, this one dam provides more power than the entire Korean nuclear industry. It provides more power than the entire Korean coal industry, just from one dam. But it also displaced 1.2 million people. According to the Chinese government, every single one of them said, I volunteer. Destroyed 13 cities, 1,300 villages destroyed. No, I am not in favor of the Three Gorges Dam. And now they're going to dam up the Mekong River, which will have terrible consequences. No, not renewables is not a good term. We should not give China credit and say they are leading the world in renewables. Virtually over 90% of their renewables come from hydropower and from this terrible form of hydropower. Geothermal has no future. The average heat that comes from within the Earth is 3,000 times less than the average heat that comes down in the form of sunlight. Heat's coming up, but it's 3,000 times less. What that means is that to really use that, unless you have a thermal area where it's focused by the Earth, it's way too expensive. Will not work. What about wind? Wind is a great technology. It is coming along. It is competitive. You are building the most advanced turbines in the world here in Korea. The main danger is that you'll build them so fast that the technology will not have time to evolve. We are learning many things about wind. How close together can you put the wind turbines? If they're really close together and you have a farm of wind turbines, do they have to be as tall? The answer turns out to be no, which means they don't look so bad on the landscape, assuming you don't like them, which some people don't. Here's a photograph of me and a wind turbine blade. Me, and the blade of a wind turbine. Here I am. and there's the blade, not installed. But these things are huge. This is to scale. And this isn't even the 10 megawatt one that you're building. This is only 8 megawatts. And there's the Statue of Liberty. These things are giant. For that reason, many environmentalists object. They say, I don't think it's beautiful. It industrializes the landscape. It kills birds and it kills bats. So beware. If you are in favor of wind, if you enter the field of working wind, then environmentalists will start yelling at you. Wind is now environmentally good, but as it expands, expect the environmentalists to oppose it. The cost, quite reasonable. This is wind cost. Costs more to install than coal, but in the end, doesn't really cost much more. So there's a great future for wind, and as I said, Korea is on the forefront of this, and there's a lot to be done. So it might industrialize me. So there are other issues too. So just expect that wind is a good solution, both for global warming and energy security. There's an issue of intermittency. Energy storage can help solve that problem, but that adds to the costs considerably. Tidal power. I mentioned tidal power. It's amazing what you're doing here in tidal power. The world is in awe of what you're doing. I think for energy security, it's great. The harm it does to the harbors, that's a tough issue. And I'm not going to address that now. You know more about that than I do. But it's certainly a concern, something that you have to pay attention to. A few words about gasoline. This is from my upcoming book, which should be published here in Korea in 2 or 3 months. It's a series of why do we love gasoline? The reason is this. Let's look at the energy per gram of different materials. Okay, here's gasoline right here. And let's compare that to an explosive, to TNT. It is 15 times greater. Gasoline has more energy per pound, per kilogram than TNT, 15 times more. That surprises everybody. Why don't we use TNT in our cars? It's not as good as gasoline. We use TNT because it releases its energy instantly, very quickly, and therefore can crack rocks. Not because it's energetic, because it's powerful. Okay, so we love gasoline because it's convenient. You can just pour it in a couple of minutes. You fill up your car. It's clean. Well, we used to think so before we worried about carbon dioxide. You can put it in a catalytic converter. And Seoul has enormous traffic problems, as you know better than I do. And yet the air is relatively good. You can handle that. And it's safe. It's unlike nuclear, where people worry about Fukushima. So this is why we like gasoline. Let's get back to this now. And now let's talk about a new technology, one that we are supposed to be in love with, one that many people are in love with. Batteries. Energy per gram of batteries, compare that to gasoline, it is 100 times less, 1%. The energy of this battery, no, the energy of this gasoline compared to the energy of the battery has to be 100 times heavier to have the same energy. That is the fundamental physics, chemistry problem that makes it difficult to make electric autos. Here are some numbers. I don't have the time to go through these right now, I'll just leave those there. But these are the basic numbers. The famous Tesla Roadster was 44% of its weight was in batteries. The range, it claimed, was 240 miles. Fill time of 90 minutes. The cost was enormous. What they're doing now is they sell you the car at an inflated price, and that inflated price includes the cost of the second set of batteries. So they say, we guarantee the batteries, but you have to pay us $80,000, $70,000. They'll include 2 sets of batteries. They don't say that. They just say they guarantee the battery. And then when the battery dies after a few years, they replace the battery. But they won't replace it a third time. The cost will not come down. Not significantly. The price of batteries is coming down. I think it's come down by about 30% since I wrote my book, but it's coming down slowly. I have these numbers here for the various cars. I don't want to go through these now. In writing my books, there's only one group of people who write me nasty letters. And these are the people who love electric automobiles. I criticize Al Gore. I make fun of him. No nasty letters from anybody. But boy, people are almost religious in their belief that cars, electric cars will work. You can tell it becomes religious when they are optimistic. They say, well, of course the price is high, but it will come down. I say, what about the price of nuclear, of gasoline, of all these other things? No, that won't come down. They're pessimistic. You choose where you're optimistic, and then you can draw the conclusions that you want. Running a little bit late on time here. So is there no hope? Well, actually, yes, there is hope. And this is what I see as the key to addressing to addressing global warming. It is recognizing that in the developing world, air pollution and global warming are tightly linked. China, they may say they care about global warming. They care more about their growing economy. But their growing economy is being killed by air pollution. And air pollution comes from coal. And if they can reduce coal, they will. And you and we can help them reduce coal. That's the secret. It's an environmental catastrophe. This isn't China, this is Seoul on a bad day. As of this morning, I looked at the maps. You can get these online. This is a map of air pollution in Seoul. You can see it is healthy almost everywhere. A few cases of mildly moderate. Good air this morning, even after the enormous traffic. This is available at aqicn.com. Look at this. This is this morning. Okay, so this is this morning. And here's China. And red is just what you think it is. And purple, red is unhealthy. Purple is very unhealthy. Frequently, it gets up into the catastrophic levels. Meanwhile, look at Korea. And Japan is worse than the Korea this morning. Whatever's over there is not coming over here. We are now engaged at Berkeley Earth in a major study of air pollution. We're applying the same mathematical sophistication to air pollution and to these wonderful data that are available. By the way, Korea, for the most part, still does not make available the key measurement that we need, which is called PM 2.5. And I strongly urge Korea to start publishing the PM 2.5 to make these sensors available for the country. Here's a bad day for Korea. And you can see Seoul had some unhealthy for sensitive groups up here. This is a bad day. But look, it's surrounded by green. And here's Japan, surrounded by green. This is not pollution coming from China. Now, this is covering only 4 months. And during those 4 months, the wind was not blowing from China to Korea. So that's why they're unrelated. This is the last 4 months. For the rest of the year, we don't know yet because we haven't studied it yet. We are accumulating the data. But in Beijing, this is a photograph I took in Beijing. It is catastrophic. We're submitting a paper to Science magazine, and the numbers are that 3,300 people in China die every day, 3,300 every day from air pollution. It's a catastrophe. They have to do something about that. Because we are Berkeley Earth, of course, we make movies. And you can see the hourly changes in air pollution here. One thing you can see is that Beijing is not so much worse than anywhere else. People think it's located in the basins and in the cities, but it's all over. Get rid of coal. Compared to natural gas, it produces 2 to 3 times as much carbon dioxide. We can also calculate where it's coming from. And you'll see here, it's not coming from Beijing. It's coming from these other cities. What they've done is they've moved the coal out of Beijing. Coal is the thing we need to attack. A couple other plots here I'll go through quickly. So what can we do? We can reduce coal in the developing world. If Korea and the United States can help reduce coal in the developing world, we will solve the greatest environmental issue of the world today, which is not global warming, it is air pollution. But at the same time, we will solve global warming. Solve air pollution and global warming together by reducing coal. Let's the US and Korea set examples. You've got to reduce coal. How can you reduce coal? It's 35% of your economy. The global warming had this icon of polar bears. The polar bears are not dying from ice going away. That's been checked. The judge, that was one of the things he said. He said, no, you have to admit that there's no evidence that polar bears are dying. So what do we do to get people to care about reducing air pollution in China? I have the obvious answer. Pandas. Chengdu has this terrible air pollution. Save the pandas. Reduce coal in China. And now for my last thing, I'm going to show you a movie that was taken in Chengdu a year ago. So get ready for this. Okay, now watch his hands. Anyway, so that's it. Save the pandas. Let's get rid of coal, and you are just the right generation to be part of this of this fight, and you can win it, but it will take your best efforts. Go for it. Thank you.